Talking Paranormal.
But yeah, I think something was getting your attention. Are you still in that house now?
I am actually, yeah. After my divorce, my mom and dad's house was literally like 6 or 7 minutes away from the home I lived in when I was married, and they had like when I was a younger man. My dad's dad passed away, and my mom lived in an area of town that was not very safe, especially for an elderly woman. So they sold her house, and they ended up having an efficiency apartment built onto their home, and it had its own bathroom, its own small kitchen, and then had a fairly good sized living area where my grandma had a bed and she had her TV and a couple of chairs, and she lived with us for the rest of her life, basically. So she had passed away in the early 80s, and when my divorce was final, I moved into that apartment so that I could get my feet back underneath me, get all the bills paid off and start putting money away, get myself another house, right? Um, my dad had passed away, obviously, back in 87. My mom was still living here, and she's a wonderful woman, love her to death. Just the kind of thing you ever want to meet. And so she wasn't charging me rent. She was letting me, put all the money away I could so I could get another down payment on another house. And the unfortunate thing is, like, during that first year and a half that I was there, I started to notice some cognizant issues with her. There would be questions that would be like, "The hell are you asking me that for? You ought to know that." And she eventually got diagnosed with underlying dementia, and it had come out a couple of times. She had a pretty severe infection, like in her stomach lining or the wall of her abdomen or something. And for some reason, underlying dementia like comes out when you have that kind of an infection. And like literally to the point of when she was in the hospital, she would say, "Oh, did you see the scuba divers out on the roof of the building?" And I'm like, "The hell are you talking about? That doesn't even make any sense,
Yeah.
So throughout the time that I lived here with her, it started to become apparent that she had dementia. And, I was an only child. It wasn't like I had brothers or sisters to help out with it, come in and check on her. So I kind of ended up feeling like it was my duty to stay here and help her where she needed help. And as the years went by, it started to get more and more aggressive, and up until the point late last November, just a couple of days before Thanksgiving, it had taken a downturn to the point where it was not going to be safe anymore for her to be home alone while I went to work. And I ended up having to put her into a nursing home. I've actually been able to maintain ownership of the home. So I am still here in the same house that I grew up with and had all those experiences. Now, the thing I can tell you about that is I haven't had anything happen here in ages.
Yeah.
Ages. Just nothing. Completely quiet.
Interesting.
And that's the weird thing, like the stuff that happened with my dad, that I attributed to my dad. When we were moving out of here to get our own apartment, when we decided we were going to get engaged and we were going to get married, we decided, we need to go get our own place. So we decided to get an apartment, and then we had a bunch of friends come over and help us move all of our stuff. And I was on a semi pro paintball team at the time, and 2 or 3 of the guys that were on my team came and helped us move. And one of them, his name was Barry. He was of Asian descent, Korean, I think. His mom was Korean. She was like 3.5 feet tall, and his dad was a U.S. military guy who was like 6.5 feet tall. So when you saw those two together, it was like, good Lord, how does that even work? And he wound up being this very muscular, 6 foot tall, very Korean looking, but you know, typically you see they're much smaller stature than he is. So he was like this anomalous looking guy. And he was super talented, very great, and a great artist. Funnier than hell. Some of the things he would say, it just you just couldn't help but laugh. And he was helping me take down we had this huge king size plus, I think it was called the California King waterbed. And it was this big pedestal style thing. It had drawers underneath it and these stained glass cabinets on the headboard and stuff. And he was helping me take it apart to move it out of this house. And he said, he's like, "Hey buddy, I'm gonna help you get this taken apart. And then I'm gonna go over to the apartment. I'm gonna wait for you guys to get there and we'll get everything unloaded." And I was like, "Wait a minute, man." I said, that wasn't the deal. You know, you're supposed to be helping us. And he's like, "Yeah, but," and he kind of just kind of looked up at the ceiling. He's like, you got some stuff going on here." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You know what I mean." And I was like, you can sense that?" And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, "It's cool, man." He's like, "You know, it's like, it's fine, but I don't want to be around it." And I was like, "All right." So he finished helping me take apart this massive waterbed. We got it loaded in the truck, and then he went and got in his car and he drove over to the new apartment. And sure enough, he was there till like 3:00 in the morning, helping us get stuff unloaded and put into the apartment. But he didn't want any part of being in this house.
Yeah.
And up until that point, things had pretty much tapered off. We weren't having much experiences at the house anymore. But he certainly he tuned in on it, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't want to do this." So
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that it quietened down. I would have thought normally I would expect it to ramp up to a point where you had to engage, but
yeah,
that's good. I don't know what it means, but that's
yeah,
good.
it was completely the opposite of what you normally, you know, if there's a lot of activity and things are happening. And but you know, like once we left the house, we never had any issues at the apartment. I built our first house in 1990. We never had anything happen there. I built our next house in 97. No, 99. Now at that house, we had some stuff that kind of got weird. And there's some, I have to be careful because there's some stuff that transpired with their mom and a visit to Buffalo Grove Cemetery in Chicago, which is reputedly very haunted. So out of respect for my kids and the possibility that they would end up watching this video, I'm not going to go into those things. I did it on Tony's show, on his paid members show.
Okay, yeah.
Because not a lot of people were going to hear that.
That's cool.
But during the time that things started kind of getting weird between him and his mom and I, my son and I, we were down in the basement. My son loves video games. I probably bought him his first PlayStation way too early in life. He's very good at playing these games. It's you know, a lot of people say video games have ruined kids as far as going outside and playing. I tend to agree with that, but also his hand-eye coordination was, you know, head and shoulders above anybody else. His problem-solving skills were ridiculously good. So I think there is some good that comes from playing video games, but you know, the thing where you need to get outside, play, get dirty, he obviously wasn't that kid. But I used to enjoy just kind of like hanging out with my kids while they were doing what they do. And, you know, I had no desire to play with Barbie dolls, but my daughter, you know, she wanted to play with Barbies. I'd sit there and I'd watch her, or I'd engage with her, you know, just because I was spending time with my kids. I was engaged with them. I wanted them to I wanted to not just be, you know, this male figure that walked in and walked out every day. And, you know, I wanted to stay engaged. And so I was downstairs in the basement with my son, and I'd built the basement to be like a man cave. I had my pool table down there. We had a big 57-inch screen TV. Back at that time, it was huge, compared to now. They're much bigger now, but it was kind of, part of it was like a theater room, and that's just where the family went to hang out and relax and do our thing. So I let him hook up his PlayStation or his Xbox to the big 57-inch TV, and that's right about the time where the Kinect came out. And as we all know, or most of us should know, that the Kinect technology is what many started using as part of the SLS cameras for ghost hunting. And so I got everything set up for him. I'm pretty tech minded kind of guy, and I got everything set up for him. I got the camera positioned right, and he was playing some game, and I said, "Hey, why don't you get the Cabela's game going?" Because it used the Kinect thing, and you had this plastic rifle, and you could shoot deer and whatever. And I'm terrible at video games. You put a controller in my hand, and I'll walk into a corner, and I can't figure out how to get out of the corner. It's just, but if like shooting games, I'm good at. So he started up the Cabela's game, and while we were waiting for the game to load, the 57-inch TV, the Kinect camera would have this little picture-in-picture down in the corner of the TV screen, and it was on a 57-inch TV, it was a pretty good size screen, and it's mapping the room, and it's mapping my son's figure sitting on the love seat to the right of me. It's mapping me sitting in a rocking chair to the left of him. And I looked at it and I saw it, but I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to it. And my son says, "Dad?" I said, "What?" And he goes, "What's that?" And I said, "What?" And he goes, "Look." And he points at the TV. And I said, "What am I looking at, son?" And he's like, "Look over behind your left shoulder." And sure enough, it was mapping him sitting on the love seat. It was mapping me sitting in the recliner or the rocking chair, and over my left shoulder, back in the back corner of the basement, about 20 feet behind me, it was mapping a third figure. There wasn't nobody there. I mean, I look back there.
I'm very dubious about the Kinect myself, because I've used one of those cameras, and it picks up. Obviously, it's designed to look for human figures, and we've tested it on like the dog and ballistas in the house with those big globes on, and it just puts a stick figure there because that's what it's. Anything that resembles,
that's what it's intended to do.
Yeah, I can't discount your story, but we're on ground where I'm like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but it was weird. And he was like, he said, "I'm done," and he shut everything off, and he started going upstairs, and I just stood there and I looked back at the back of the room, and honestly, I don't know that I felt anything, and and it could be very much like what you're saying. It was just mapping something about the corner of the room, whether it was the perfect up and down where the walls met, from the side wall and the back wall. It could have been picking up the line in the corner and mapped that. I don't know. It was just weird.
How long was it not there? Because really, you'd think it would see it immediately.
That's a good question. Like I said, it wasn't like I was sitting there staring at that little picture-in-picture screen. We were chatting back and forth, talking about whatever, probably talking something about him playing Rocket, the Pee Wee football. Because that was big, a big thing between him and I, and I coached him in football, and it just was. He noticed it and mentioned it to me, and I looked and I was like, "Holy shit! Why is there somebody standing behind me?" And there clearly wasn't. So
You can't see it. It shouldn't be able to see it, should it? Because it's a camera, and it does map out shadow, the darker aspects of shadow. So if the camera's seeing something, you should have been able to see something with your naked eye, really.
Right. Yeah.
But
it was weird, but taking into consideration the time that happened with what I was going through in my relationship with my wife at the time.
Yeah.
And the immediate change in personality and the way she interacted with me after returning from Bachelor's Grove, it kind of fed into what I assumed was taking place in the house.
Yeah.
Could have been completely. I'm open to the fact that it could have been something that I was manufacturing in my mind, and that none of it was factual. Again, I'm not going to get into it because there's some things that are topics that are not something I'd want my kids to ever hear.
Yeah.
But
You never know.
There was something going on.
Yeah. Sounds like a great house, but is it? Did you say that something had happened 2 weeks ago? Just to finally close on.
Yeah. So this is, you got a little bit of time, or are we running out of time?
Do it.
So I had a gentleman on my show. I first found him from being on an episode of The Confessionals, and I thought he had some really interesting things to talk about. And I started following him on Instagram. And at one point, he did an Instagram live. And when I saw it go live, I kind of hopped in and I said, "Hey, I'm Erick from uNcomfortable Podcast. I saw you on Tony's show. I'd love to get a chance to have a interview with you." And he mentioned me during the live, and he says, "Yeah, I'll get a hold of you after." And he did. And we had a good show. He's kind of, he's not necessarily somebody that talks about the paranormal much as like disputing woke culture, talking about stuff that has to do with like pre-flood Bible, talking about some of the books of the Bible that have been omitted throughout the years that we never get really told about anymore. Interesting stuff. We had a great show. We ended up doing a second show after that, and he and I we become friends. And he came up to the Bigfoot conference that I held earlier this summer. He drove about 4.5 hours to do that, and we had spent some time in Ohio together at another Bigfoot conference. And great guy, love him to death. And he's like, "Hey, I got some stuff I'd really like to talk about. Are you interested in doing another show?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." And the stuff he had to talk about, I thought was pretty fascinating. And so we did it. And he talks a lot about the Nephilim and demonic entities, infiltrating music and Hollywood and all these things. He talks a lot about like the adrenochromes, and the political elites throughout the world, and the different craziness that they do with their rituals and all this stuff. And I mean, some of it is like it's kind of out there, but when you take a look at it, there's kind of indications that this stuff is probably going on, at least to some extent. So we did this episode, and right from the get-go, we started having all kinds of electronic problems. Now, yeah. I've been using this equipment that I'm talking to you on right now for the better part of 2 years. I've done over 100 episodes with it. I've had no issues with it whatsoever. It's a great product. I would recommend it to anybody who is interested in getting into podcasting. It's the Rodecaster Pro. It's basically a studio in a box, and it does everything you could possibly need it to do. And typically, like this, I'm looking at the camera because, I'm speaking with you through a video chat. where normally the majority of my interviews are done via phone, and I'm looking at the Rodecaster to make sure the levels are right and continually, checking to make sure that everything is recording right, and how much time we have on the SD card and all that stuff. And I started getting all these right off the bat. I had this really odd, low frequency, pulsating hum that was coming through my in-ear monitors. I used to use the big Mickey Mouse headsets, but I'd find like on an hour and a half, 2-hour interview, my ears are getting sweaty and it was uncomfortable. So I ended up going with these ear monitors. They're much more comfortable. And I'm getting this weird hum coming through. And then I start noticing this clicking noise that was not, there was no pattern to it. It wasn't like every 3 seconds or every 5 seconds. There would be a click, 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 click. It was weird. And I had hit record, but I hadn't turned his microphone on yet. So at the beginning of that episode, I left some of it in so that people would recognize that I was having electronic issues while talking to him. And so we get through with the interview, and we used an online service that's called Zencastr, which is very much like what we're using here with Skype, only Zencastr is designed so that you on your end would be able to record your audio remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could retrieve your audio track, bring it over here, and then stitch it all together. So it sounded like you and I were in the same room. Well, we got kicked off of the Zencastr website, the server. We got kicked off 10 times throughout the discussion of these Nephilim and the negative entities and, the demonic and all this stuff. And it was all happening. We were able to record a decent amount of stuff with no problems. But then when we really were getting into the brunt of what he wanted to talk about, we started having these massive problems. And I could not retrieve the audio from his portion of it. He ended up having to download his audio and then send it to me in an email.
Yeah.
Through I think it was through either Dropbox or Google Drive.
Yeah.
And the first 2 times that he sent it to me, it broke it down into 2 specific files, and each one of the files was 20 minutes even.
Yeah.
But we recorded for like over an hour and a half. So the first 2 times that he sent it to me, I wasn't getting the whole show. And we were kind of freaking out a little bit about it because it was like, holy crap, did we just go through all this and now we're not going to be able to put this out?
Yeah.
He tried it again a 3rd time and sent it to me. I think it was through Google Drive. And I was actually able to get 2 files, and I saw the 2 files and I'm like, nope, it did it again. It's only sent 2 files. But this time the first file was like 28 minutes and some seconds long. And the next one was like an hour and 13 minutes long. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I got the whole thing now. Well, I had made friends with a couple of younger fellows from Ohio at one of the Bigfoot conferences that I went to, and they've got a show called Cryptids of the Corn. And it's a different type of show than mine. They deal more with like folklore and, like one-off cryptids like the Loveland Frogman or, the Mothman, or, every week they cover something differently, and they do a really neat job because the one guy was a biologist. So he brings in some science to it, and they're great guys. It's enjoyable. And it's not a show that is like super, super serious. They have fun with it, and it's just a good show. Well, I introduced this guest to them, and they were like, oh man, we'd love to have him on. So he went on to their show, and they talked specifically about Dogman. And that was it, because he had gone on a hunt for Dogman down in the Kentucky forests. And they had no intentions about getting onto the topic of Nephilim or any of that stuff like he was talking with me. But the conversation led that way, and all of a sudden, then they use a completely different type of recording process. All of a sudden, he starts talking about this stuff, and their entire system goes down. And they use a Zoom, and it's got a battery backup, so that if power does get taken out at some point, it immediately kicks into the battery backup, and there's no loss of recording. Battery backup didn't work. So they spent 20 some minutes trying to get their stuff back online, and finally were able to finish the recording. So that was weird. Then he goes down and he does a show with Tony on the confessionals fairly recently, about a month ago. And they start talking about the same stuff. And after about an hour and a half of recording, they find that Tony's Rodecaster, the same exact thing that I use, had stopped and was completely dead. Once they pulled the SD card out, they found that it recorded for about 35 minutes, and the rest of the audio for that they had to pull off of the camcorders that they had running in the studio. So there's a huge difference in the audio quality to finish up the show. And we kind of all started talking about, why is it when we had the same guy on each show, and we start having all kinds of electronic issues with getting through what he's trying to say. Well, Tony down in the confessionals had put out a message to all of us who had been involved with it and said, hey, what do you guys think about coming down to my studio, and we'll all sit in the same room, we'll get it recorded, see if we have any electronic issues, and try to get it to replicate itself, or if not, at least give him an opportunity to say what he wants to say uninterrupted, and then we can, kind of break it down from there. And I was like, I think that's a great idea, So we set it up for the 15th of this month, which was last Saturday. And so I took Friday off of work, and Friday was going to be my travel day down to Knoxville, Tennessee. And that was per my GPS on my cell phone, it was a 7.5 hour trip, which is a pretty long drive. Now, the guys from the Cryptids of the Corn, they were in Ada, Ohio, which is like 3.5 hours from me. Their trip was going to be about 6.5 hours, 6 hours or 6.5. And then Joel actually lived the closest to Knoxville, and his trip was about 4 hours. So we decided, and this is where everything starts getting really, really weird. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of the things that transpired. I don't know when your episode of this is going to air, but my episode with all these gentlemen is going to air on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, in 2 days. But I'm starting to think that I'm going to have to do an additional episode to explain my portion of the things that happened on my trip down there. The weirdness kind of starts at, the Monday before. My son wakes up and he's sick. My son lives about 2 hours away from me, and he was going to go down to Tennessee with me. We were going to split the drive. So he was going to come down, and then he was going to take Friday off. We were going to go down and split the drive on the way down to Tennessee. He ends up not realizing, but he doesn't have any more vacation time, and he can't take Friday off. He gets really sick after being at a wedding. And on about Wednesday of that week, last week, I said, listen, I've already paid for the Airbnb down there for Friday and Saturday night. I said it'd be a waste if we couldn't take advantage of being there Friday as well. I said, why don't you just, when you get out of work Friday, you travel down to my house, stay here for the weekend with the dogs. I'll do the trip myself, and, everything will be fine. And he's like, yeah, that's probably best. So now I don't have somebody to ride down there with, and I'm okay with that. I leave the house at about 10 after 10 in the morning on Friday morning. I go to a local gas station. I fill up my car, get a couple of Red Bulls for the ride. And I think I got myself a honey bun for breakfast. And I started on my way down there. So at 10:30, I am on the road headed to Knoxville, Tennessee. My GPS is showing that I should arrive at 7:34 that night. I immediately get a phone call, and it is Joel, the gentleman that we're going down there to talk to. He's like, "Hey, bud, just checking on you, seeing what time you're getting on the road, what time you think you're going to be there." And I said, "Man, I just got on the road. GPS says I should be there 7:30. I know I'm going to have to stop for gas twice. So, we're probably looking in the neighborhood of 8 o'clock, 8:15 at the latest." He's like, "All right, man, have a great trip. We'll see you when you get down there." So I'm on the road. And I get a couple of text messages pop in while I'm driving. Obviously, I'm driving, so I'm not answering the text messages. I get a couple of phone calls from some people. So I, like, on the way down to Midway in about Kentucky, I have some very distinct points of that I can go to in my phone where I received phone calls, where the phone call stopped and where it started, and timestamps of text messages that I got, and I know where I was at when I got the text messages. So I get down through all of Indiana, and I'm in Kentucky. And all three of us, even though we're coming from three different places, all of our routes converge on 75, which is a main interstate that goes through Kentucky into Tennessee. So the guys from Ada, Ohio, they were coming southeast and then hit 75. Joel was coming southeast. He hit 75. And I was coming down around the east side of Indianapolis. And then I connected with 75 as well. So we all, that second part of the route, were all on the same highway. And I get down to Lexington, Kentucky, which is where the exit is that you get onto 75. And I almost immediately get stuck in traffic. And on my GPS, it's showing a red line of traffic. It says like 22 minutes, for the amount of time I'm going to be in the traffic. And I came to a complete dead stop. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm just, typically I listen to a lot of music. Sometimes I listen to podcasts when I travel. Today, I was just like, this was my chance to just spend time in my own head. And I was, thinking about interviews that I had coming up. I was thinking about other things that I needed to do. And I was just floating around in my own head. And I noticed that it's like, holy crap, the sky is like completely blue. It's just a beautiful day. It's like 70 degrees. The sun is out. And the sky is just blue, man. There is not a cloud to be seen anywhere. And I'm looking out my driver's side window and, looking across the front of my windshield from left to right. And there's no clouds, man. It's just gorgeous out. And I look out my passenger side window, and then I'm the focal point of where I'm sitting at is there is this huge water tower. And on the water tower, it says Lexington. And then below it, I think it says something like the Jewel of Kentucky or something of Kentucky. And I notice off to the right of the water tower, up in the sky, up and to the right of it, there's this one little cloud. It's like a little cotton ball. And I can remember in my head going, oh man, that poor little guy, he lost all the rest of the clouds. They left him behind. And I keep looking around, and my attention keeps going back to this one tiny little cloud. And it is like literally this cotton ball, in the vastness of the sky. And I'm looking at it, and I keep looking to make sure that the brake lights in front of me are still lit and nobody's moving, and I keep looking back at this cloud, and I notice that it's typically if you have a cloud in the sky and if it's moving, it's either moving to the left or to the right, or it's coming towards you, or it's moving away from you. And this wasn't doing that. It was, the only thing I can really attribute it to is, like, if you have any idea what a 3D rendering program is on a computer, where you create like a block or a cylinder, and then you can take your mouse and you can make it so it rotates so you can see all the way around it and stuff. That's kind of how this cloud was moving. It was kind of rolling over on itself and kind of turning at its axis as well.
Yeah.
And it looked like a cloud. I mean, it's not like I thought there was something hidden in the cloud, or, it wasn't something that was camouflaged behind the cloud. I wasn't getting anything like that. It was this cloud, but it was moving in a weird way. And it really struck me. And I started to be kind of fascinated by it. And, I kept looking at making sure nobody was moving because so much of my attention was on this. And as I watched it, and this is going to make me sound like an absolute lunatic, I know it is, and I shouldn't even say it, but as I'm watching this little cloud, like on the bottom of the bottom of the cloud itself, on the left-hand side of the bottom of it, there started to be this little wisp that started coming out of it that almost looked like if you grabbed a piece of cotton out of a cotton ball and started pulling it. It was like this little tail of white stuff. And don't get me wrong, through watching this whole thing, this always looked like cloudy material, whatever clouds are created by vapor or whatever it is. I mean, it was all billowy and no hard edges to it whatsoever, but I started to watch it as this little tail kind of was coming out, and as it separated from the rest of the cloud, it kind of took on the shape of, what the yin and yang symbol is?
Yes.
Okay, so if you separated the black little tadpole and the white little tadpole and pulled them apart, what was at the bottom of this cloud now was shaped like the white part of the yin and yang symbol. It had a bulbous head, and then it had a little curled tail at the back of it. And I was like, man, that is weird. Yeah. And it continued to move in a counterclockwise direction to the bottom of the cloud. And then all of a sudden, another wisp was coming out of the bottom of the cloud. And it did the same goddamn thing.
Yeah.
Now I've got two of those shapes, and it kept subtracting from the volume of the cloud.
Yeah.
So the original cloud was getting smaller. And then after the second one came out, what was left over of the cloud turned into that shape as well. So this, man, saying it out loud is just like, I need to stop talking because it's ridiculous. But I'm looking up at these three tadpole looking shapes.
Yeah.
But now there's like one on the side, one here, and one underneath. So it's in an oddly shaped triangle.
Yeah.
And I literally said out loud to myself, I'm like, what in the F am I looking at here? Why is this doing this?
Yeah.
And just like that, it just started to dissipate. And it was gone. So the little cloud and everything was gone, And then, like, right at that point, traffic started moving again. And it was just weird. It was very strange. And I was on the road for about 40 more minutes. And because I had a feeling that all this electronic interference that we were having from this guy was, there was something to it because it was happening on so many different shows. And I had contacted a light worker who was on one of my recent episodes. Her name's JJ Rose. And I started talking to her about it. And I told her why I was going down to Tennessee, what the whole goal of all of us getting together was. And, you know, in her own way, she decided to pretty much like put a bubble of protection around me, because she felt that whatever was happening was not great. Not necessarily that it was coming after me, or, you know, but she had developed a relationship with me, and she wanted to make sure I was safe. And she's like, do you mind if I bubble you and, you know, kind of pop in on you here and there to make sure everything's all right? I'm like, absolutely, you know, do your thing, man. So she had sent me early on in the trip, she had sent me a text message that said, be safe, you know, hope you get down there, everything's okay. Do me a favor, don't let yourself get below a half tank of gas. And, you know, that's a typical mom thing for somebody to say, you know, so I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. But after the Lexington cloud thing, about 40 minutes later, I was getting into the area of Richmond, Kentucky. And I looked down, and my gas tank was just below half tank. And I was like, shit, I got to get gas. So I pulled into this truck stop, which is the most bizarre thing you'd ever see. It's called Buc-ee's, and there's got to be 200 gas pumps there. Mm-hmm. It's like 300 yards long. I've never seen so many gas pumps in the same place in my entire life. Yeah. And then there's a building that you can go into, and I filled up with gas. I was actually on the phone with a woman who I'm friends with in Louisiana, and our phone call, I said, hey, dear, I'm pulling in to get gas. I'll call you back as soon as I get back on the road. And I hung up with her, and that phone call ended at 7 p.m. Mm. I filled up with gas. I pulled around the long 300 yards worth of gas pumps. I went into the building, walked directly to the back, went pee, came out, grabbed a sandwich off of the deli counter, walked up, paid for it. I didn't have to stand in line. I was the only one at the counter. Walked back out to my car, moved out of the parking space I was in to the side of the building, pulled in another parking space, wolfed down that sandwich really quick, and then got back on the road. Well, I tried to call this woman that I had been talking to. I tried to call her, but my phone would not, and it's a iPhone 12, 13. My finger would not react with the touch screen to let me call her back. And I tried it 3 times and it would not let me do it. But yet I could still swipe up and get back to my GPS on my phone. I could swipe up and I could get to the my iMessages, my text messages, but it wouldn't let me initiate the phone call. And like I said, I tried it 3 times. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of being on the road, she tried calling me. And when I go to push the the button on the screen, it wouldn't react to it. It wouldn't let me answer the call. And I did that twice. And the third time she called me back, I said, well, shit, I can hit the button on my car to answer the phone instead. So I was like, oh, that makes more sense. So she called me back the third time and I pushed answer, and it opened the app on my phone like it was going to answer the phone. And then it just whipped off and went right back to my GPS. So, like I said, I'd probably been on the road again for a good half hour, maybe 40 minutes, maybe a little bit more. And I sent her a text message that says, I'm okay, just so she knew. Yeah. But my phone was in a cradle that was on a suction cup up against the windshield. So it wasn't like I could just readily just text, So I hit the microphone thing and I said, I'm okay, and then send. And it wasn't long after that. Now, mind you, I pulled in there at 7:00. Yeah. All right. And I can verify that because I can look at the time stamp on the phone call that I had with her. It was 7:00, and I was supposed to be in Knoxville, Tennessee at 7:30.
Right.
But, with a couple of stops for gas, we figure 8:00. Well, I'm like 15 minutes, but I still got 170 miles to go.
Nice.
And it's not adding up right, And God love this woman. She's a terrific person, and she's got a fantastic sense of humor. And that's where this kind of comes into play, but it's really weird that she chose this to show her sense of humor in the way that she worded it. She ends up sending a message through Instagram to the confessionals, which is ultimately where I'm headed, right? And in her message, she says, check on Erick. I haven't heard from him in some time. The last I knew, he was pulling into a Buc-ee's in Kentucky, a Buc-ee's truck stop in Kentucky. The next line reads, Buc-ee's truck stops have been associated with missing time phenomenon.
Wow. Okay.
And so, I explained to you that this place was huge, right?
Yeah.
They have Buc-ee's where she lives. And I can tell you this from like walking in, there were deer feeders, like stacked outside the doors. You could buy like farm and fleet equipment. You could buy clothing. You could buy, it was like, this building was just crazy. Not only was it a gas station, but it was, there was a grocery section in it, they had fresh food. You could have literally spent hours in this place.
Yeah.
So that was her sense of humor, was that, missing time phenomenon is associated with Buc-ee's because there's so much shit to do in there. You can get lost. But I thought it was really weird that she chose that avenue to let her sense of humor show.
Yeah.
When I was already dealing with being so far off target as far as time-wise with my arrival. So Tony from the confessionals, he sends me a text message that says, bro, you okay? ? And like I said, my phone's up on the thing. So I just simply hit the little emoji that's thumbs up and I sent it to him. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Thumbs up. It is starting to kind of wear on me a little bit that I have had a couple of slow 20-minute interruptions in traffic, but I've not gone off course. I didn't take any wrong exits. I didn't have to change my my course of travel throughout the whole time at all. Everything was on track. Everything was normal. The only thing that was like even remotely bizarre was watching that cloud back 40 minutes ago, an hour and some minutes ago now. And then I get a message pops up on my a banner from Instagram that says somebody who is following my Uncomfortable podcast on Instagram sent me a message. And I saw the banner pop up, but obviously I'm not going to answer that while I'm driving. But then my phone flips over to Instagram, to her profile, and her message is sitting there. And she says something to the effect of, hey, I was just listening to one of your episodes, and when I set my phone down, the SLS Ghost app on my phone opened up by itself. And I thought that was weird. So I picked up the phone and scanned my room with it, and there was a little green figure standing in front of me in my apartment, and I had to message you and let you know I think that it's here for you. That was weird. And that happened at 8:00. So that's a bizarre message to get from somebody. Now, what's the relevance of 8:00? While I'm reading that, the phone rings, and it's Joel, the guy that we're going down to do the interview with. He's at the Airbnb. It's 8:00. He was getting ready to go on and do an episode with L.A. Marzulli. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a well-known author when it comes to talking about like ancient giants and the Nephilim and pre-flood Bible and stuff like that. So they were getting ready to do an episode talking about the angelic wars on Mars, of all things. And, you know, my eyes are rolling in the back of my head. And it's like, oh my God, man, let it go. You know, how many times you got to talk about this stuff? Then he goes on to tell me, he's like, we just get connected with LA and we're getting ready to do the episode and the power goes out at the Airbnb. And it was at 8:00. So now I've got the girl who I was trying to get in touch with again at 8:00 sends a text message about missing time phenomenon. Yeah. Even though it's a joke, even though it's her sense of humor. But I am experiencing a delay in getting down there. I have a woman pop in from, of all places, this woman who messaged me about the Ghost app is in Oregon, all the way on the West Coast, 2,000 miles away from me. Then I get a phone call that says the power is out at 8:00 at our Airbnb while he's getting ready to start talking about the same things. He's getting into the same type of stuff that we have all the electronic phenomenon going on in our shows.
Yeah.
And once I finally get down there, I end up getting there at 9:34.
Right.
So the 7.5 to 8 hour trip takes me 11 hours to get there. I did not go off course. I'm a smart guy, you know, and I live by my GPS religiously. Mm-hmm. The route I took is the route that I ended up, the route that I chose on my GPS is exactly the route that I took on the way down there. Yeah. I can't say that I don't have any time that I can account for. I don't have anything where I'm kind of foggy, like, man, I don't remember going through here or going through there. Everything is like where it's supposed to be in my head. Yeah. But once I get to the Airbnb and my GPS says you've arrived, I go to turn into the driveway of the Airbnb. And as soon as my headlights hit the gravel of the driveway, the lights on the Airbnb come on. Right as I get there. Yeah. And so that was kind of shocking because all of a sudden all the outside lights come on, you know, and so we get inside and we start talking, and you know, it's weird that they're having electronic experiences at the Airbnb. And Joel was going to start talking about the same stuff that he talked about on all of our episodes where we had electronic interferences. And I said, yeah, that's all weird. But I said, I don't even want to tell you guys what I saw when I was in Lexington. And they're like, oh, well, you got to tell us now. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So I started telling them about this cloud. Joel jumps up out of his chair, like literally jumps out of his chair. And I saw that same cloud. Yeah. And I was like, no, you didn't. And he's like, yeah, I swear to God, I did. And I said, all right, wait a minute. And as I'm doing that, Justin from the Cryptids of the Corn stands up and points at his partner, Jay, and says, and he's just standing there pointing at him. And then Jay looks over at me and he goes, hey, man, we saw that cloud. You know, like really no big deal, you know. And it's like, yeah, it was the only cloud in the sky. Yeah. And I said, you know, like, screw you guys. I said, so I walked over to this credenza and I picked up a couple of pieces of paper and I handed everybody a piece of paper and a pen and a pencil. And I said, you draw what you saw. And then when you're done drawing it, flip it over so nobody can see it. Well, we all did that. And I walked over to the credenza and I drew what I saw, but on the backside of the paper, I drew what it turned into. And just then the door opens up and it's Tony from the confessionals. He pulled in right shortly after I did. And I said, this is perfect. Now, nobody Tony doesn't know a damn thing about what we're talking about. Tony, go grab the picture that everybody drew and you look at them and see what you see. So he had somebody with him, and he goes over and he collects all these pictures that we had, and he's got 3 of them in his hand, and he's like, okay, so you all drew the same thing. And he lays them down on the table, and he's like, I don't know what you guys are doing here, but I mean, you obviously all drew the same thing. Handed my piece of paper, and he's like, okay, you drew the same thing too. And I said, flip it over. And he flipped it over, and that's where I drew what it looked like when it was, after it morphed into whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
And then we go on to tell him the story about how all of us saw the same cloud. Well, at the end of the weekend, all of this was bothering us so much that after we got done recording our episode together, we started pulling out our phones and going through timestamps, like from text messages. I know when Joel called me and told me that the power went out is the same time that I got the text message from the lady in Oregon that said she had the ghost standing there in front of her. One of the other guys, Jay, the one that said, yeah, man, we saw the cloud too. His wife or girlfriend had messaged him later in the evening saying, hey, the power just came back on. We lost power at the house in Ada, Ohio at 8:00. I actually got a text message from one of the guys from the power company down in Tennessee, Alcoa Power Company, that details, sorry for the inconvenience in the area of such and such. There was a power outage on Friday night, and it went from 8 to 9:30 p.m. So I actually have validation of that message that came off of Facebook from the power company that it did in fact go out. It was just a bizarre, and by the end of the night, by the end of Saturday night, we had determined that each one of us had seen that same cloud at the water tower. But Joel was the first one to get there. He saw that at about 2 p.m. At 2 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah.
The guys from the Cryptids of the Corn, when they saw it, they were at the water tower at 4 p.m. When I saw it, I was at the water tower at 6 p.m. So there were 2 hours in between each. So what are the chances that a cloud remained motionless in the same spot, for that number of hours? And what was the significance of what it turned into to me? Because when I saw it and it had morphed into this weird little 3 tadpoles, I couldn't help but feel that it, seeing 3 of them, it made me think that it had something to do with the Holy Trinity. It could be completely off, but that's what it made me think of. Then taking into consideration, early Saturday afternoon, I received a text message from the lady that bubbled me up from California, the psychic that put the bubble around me to keep me safe. She sent me a text message that said 222. That's all it said.
Yeah.
222. And not written out, but the numbers 222.
Yeah.
And I said, sweetheart, you're going to have to do better than that because I don't know what the hell that means. And she goes, I don't either, but it's going to have some relevance. Well, once we figured out that Joel saw the cloud at 2:00 and the cryptids saw it at 4:00 and I saw it at 6:00, there was a 2-hour difference between each one of us. So it was 222. What that has to do with anything, I have no idea. But for a random text from a person who claims psychic abilities,
Yeah.
that was very on point.
Yeah.
The other thing is, afterwards, she sent me this little, it was like a chart of like angelic numbers or something. And it had 111, 222, 333, and each one of them up to 999 had a little paragraph below it, meaning, what it's supposed to be, signify.
Okay.
And under 222, basically what it says is in the right place at the right time don't worry, everything is working out exactly as it's supposed to. Which on the second half of that trip, once I had left the Buc-ee's truck stop, with the inordinate amount of time that it took me to travel the rest of the distance that I was going, I would have had to have been traveling at an average of 31.5 miles an hour for it to take me that long to get there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. I was on a major highway, 65, 70 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't add up. It doesn't, the numbers don't make any sense. But I can tell you on that second half of the trip, I had a very strong feeling that I was being delayed. Not like anything was trying to keep me from getting there.
Mm.
Not that it was trying to stop me, not that nothing like that. But I had a very strong sense that the delay was intentional.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that came from. I don't know if that is something spiritually that on the good side of spiritually that they were keeping me from there because I would have been, I might have been in a position where something bad could have happened to me. Maybe it was keeping me from getting into an accident. Maybe it was keeping me from something that was going to transpire at the Airbnb between 8 and 9:30.
Mm.
Or was it something on a negative side that was trying to keep me from getting there because they didn't want my involvement with, and I'm nobody. I'm not a learned professional in, demonology or anything like that. I'm a guy who talks to people. I have experiences, but I just sit around and talk to people, about their experiences. So I'm really left with a lot of questions about how did maybe at most an 8.5 hour trip, 8.25 hour trip take me 11 hours. There's even if I add to the amount of time that I stopped for going to the bathroom break and filling up with gas and all that, and attribute, the traffic stops that I had to being longer than they were actually, there's still like 90 minutes that I cannot account for why it took me that long to get there. That being said, that episode that we recorded while we were down there wound up being a 4-hour episode.
Yeah.
So, the first hour is pretty much kind of going over talking about how he was on each one of our shows and the things that happened to it. Then the middle 2 hours are him unabated, uninterrupted, talking about the things that he's trying to talk about. And then the last hour of it is a lot of me trying to decipher the things that happened on my way down there and trying to figure out what was at play. Were some of the things he says, I get questions in my head. It's like, and I really was hoping that we were going to be able to try to get into it, and it didn't end up doing that. But, from the standpoint of on the good side of spirituality, every time he talks, we have interruptions. So are good spirits creating these interruptions so that it draws more attention to it because what he's saying is something that people should listen to? Are they creating interruptions so that people pay attention and realize that what he's saying is not true? Is it negative entities that are drawing attention by creating these disturbances because they're trying to keep him from saying what he's saying because it's accurate? Or is it negative entities drawing attention to what he's saying so that people will pay attention to what he's saying because they're actually off doing stuff on a completely different side of things? So it's drawing attention away from what they're doing. Those are the things that really, really interest me. And I'm trying to, in my head, I'm trying to piece all this stuff together. And it just doesn't make any sense. So
it doesn't, but they all seem to happen to you.
No, I know.
Do you know what I mean? Your life's one big paranormal weird thing.
Well, and that's the other thing. I guess at the end of the day, when I start thinking about all this stuff, it's like, what is my significance in all this? And, like I said, I'm nobody. I am, I've got a decent sized podcast. It's not huge by any stretch of the imagination. It's not nearly as big as, the Confessionals or Sasquatch Chronicles or, some of these other really well-known paranormal podcasts. Mine's got legs. It's gaining popularity. But in the big picture, I'm a small fish, so why would I be, and for the most part, other than Tony with the Confessionals, the rest of us that are involved with this, we're all small fish.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's a movie, and I can't help but draw correlation to it. There's a movie that came out, I think, in 2006. The director is M. Night Shyamalan, and he did Signs, yeah. Yep. And he's had some movies that I've really, really liked. And then he's had some that have been really stinkers, man.
Yeah.
And the one I'm talking about was a terrible movie. It was called The Lady in the Water.
Yeah, rubbish.
Okay. It was a terrible movie. But there is something about that movie. So if you remember, there was a guy that only lifted weights with one arm, and he had one really big, strong arm, and the other arm was just normal. He just looked like a normal dude. And there were other people that lived in this apartment complex that were very eclectic, and each one of them had something really weird about them. And they all lived in this apartment complex. And they really didn't seem to have any place in the movie whatsoever. It was really a disjointed story. But at the end of the movie, they all had to come together, and they all had this one small significant part that, like the guy with the one arm that was really muscular, there was something that had to be done that required a lot of strength.
Yeah.
And he was the only one that could do it. And there was another aspect of the story that, only this woman could do what needed to be done. So in the sense of that movie, I kind of feel that all of these insignificant players they're taking place, experiencing this stuff that we've had happen, we've all got some role to play. I just don't understand why this, and I keep calling us this ragtag of utter nobodies.
Yeah.
Why we're being drawn into this. I mean, I don't know what the significance is. I don't know. The only thing that I can draw any kind of solace is maybe it's my voice. And I mean that in a literal and a figurative manner, because I have had so many people comment about my voice, being a great radio voice, being, perfect for what I'm doing, being able to exude comfort in my guests, that they get, even though I call it uncomfortable, they're very comfortable talking to me, and that it attracts people to my show, either to tell their experiences or to listen to other people's experiences. And then the figurative part being that, is my show a voice where somebody's experience that is significant is either been on my show or is going to be on my show, and I need to have a bigger audience so that information gets out. That's the only thing I can really wrap my head around and think, maybe that's it. Because I'm nobody special. I'm not, it's like, I don't have any powers. I'm not super intelligent in any of these aspects. It's just, I don't know. It's become a very bizarre thing, and I'm finding it very difficult to not have a good portion of my brain working on, why is this happening? Trying to piece the pieces together, trying to find why something would delay me from getting to my destination, for what purpose. But then I start thinking about that, and it's like, you hear the people say the devil is in the details, right? Well, quite literally, is the devil in the details? Am I this wrapped up in looking at all the small details in order to keep me from seeing the big picture or see the truth of what's going on? It's like, I don't know.
But you've only been doing it 2 years, and you've already got so many great stories. It'd be wonderful to see what comes in the next 2 to 10 years. You know?
No, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It's I think I said this at the beginning, you know, this has been an absolutely wonderful way to, you know, like live out my later years. It's something that I finally feel that I am on the right path, in my life. I'm not doing anything for anyone other than myself. It's making me happy. It's something that I genuinely like doing. I love making, you know, like new relationships, we've had a great conversation today, and, I've got a new friend that's, thousands of miles away. That's been a wonderful part about doing this show, is I've been able to maintain, conversations and relationships with so many of the people that I've had on the show. It's not just, hey, I want to get you on the show, ask you a few questions, you answer them, and then boom, I'm on to the next person. I am, but I still maintain a relationship with so many of the people that I've had on the show before. And, at times, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, but at times it's slightly exhausting, because, I can be having 4 or 5 conversations going throughout a day. And the next thing I know, it's like, Jesus, I didn't get a damn thing done that I needed to do, because I've been having these conversations, But I don't know, man. It's been a great ride. I've enjoyed every second of it so far. And I hope it keeps going on for a long time.
Yeah, well, those are fascinating stories, and it's been an absolute honor to have you on. And I just want this what I'm doing, the project, to meet different people like you and form a spider web that we can all interlink and find some understanding.
Yeah, it's a very important thing. Because I've had episodes where I've had questions about things that really didn't get answered for me, but I've had other people who have been guests who now currently listen to my show after being a guest, and they pipe in with their thoughts on that, and it gives me different perspectives on things, not necessarily changing my mind or forming different thoughts for myself, but it does give me an opportunity to look at some of these things from a different perspective and say, oh, now see, that does make sense to me, even though maybe it isn't my belief, but I can look at it from a different perspective and understand it. So that's a big part of the show. Yeah.
That's great. So I guarantee everyone will be wanting to go and listen to the podcast after this and see what comes of it. So thank you very much, Erick, for being a guest.
Thank you, Chris. I had a ball talking with you, and glad we got to do this. I appreciate you having me on your show, and hopefully I didn't ramble on too much.
No, it's been great. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much.